I'm Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. My guest today is someone riders turn to when they are having trouble figuring out why their horse's behavior has suddenly changed or they are stuck at a certain level of training. Joanna Bornowski is a horse communicator, intuition trainer, and mentor who uses a heart based intuitive approach to communicate what horses are feeling and thinking. Joanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Catherine.
I always start with all guests, what brought you to horses initially? And then we'll delve into what it is exactly that you do.
Okay. I don't know what started this for me. I was a small child, probably 4 or 5, maybe a little bit earlier than that, and started for asking for horses. So we would pray at the dinner table, and part of my prayer was something like, can we please have the farm and all the farm animals? And we lived in a city.
Oh,
And my mom asked me one day what's on the farm, and I said horses. And had never met a horse, wasn't interacting in any way with horses. And she asked me if there were any other animals on the farm. And I said, no, just horses. I met a friend when I was about 7 years old who took riding lessons with her mother and immediately decided that that was where I was supposed to be. And after some convincing on my part, my parents allowed me to start riding. So I got what I wanted in a different way. But yeah, so I'm not sure how that started. It's just been in me since I was very small.
yeah, it's so interesting because I always feel like when I speak to people, it is almost a calling. I myself started riding when I was 11 or 12, and it was because friends had horses, and there was, like you and my family, no connection to riding whatsoever. But I just was immediately taken with the animals and decided for the rest of my life that I was going to have to figure out a way how to be near them. So I can appreciate that. So tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, because I'm calling you an animal communicator, and I think people don't always understand exactly what that means. I guess, in the past, just as a person, I know I've spoken with mediums and psychics, but it's a very different thing, I think, an animal communicator versus that. But I think there's probably a lot of misnomers out there about what it is exactly you do. So I'd love it if you could maybe share that first with our listeners. And then I'm going to ask you a little bit about how did you know you had this gift?
Okay. So there isn't, well, animal communicators have many different talents and techniques. So my version of animal communication is potentially different than someone else's version. I use the client, the human's connection to their horse and a photo of their horse to call them in. The way that I like to really think about this is with the human there and with the photo, I can set an intention to connect with the horse, and I see it as my consciousness connecting with the horse's consciousness in a very simple way. Once I'm connected in my mind's eye, I literally see the horse come forward, and I introduce myself to them and just showing them who I am and my intention for the call and my respect for what they'd like to share with their person. And then they are typically very polite as well, introduce themselves to me. And when they start communicating to me and when I am communicating with them, we're sending pictures and sensations back and forth. So I feel physical feelings in my body and I see visuals in my mind's eye. So I'm using a heart-based meditation. I close my eyes. I'm on the phone, it's sitting in front of me. The speaker is on, and the I have a little iPad where I pull up the picture of the horse and I ask for still photos. And it's just a photo of the horse's face. I don't really see their body unless somebody includes that. But I really just want to look at the horse's face as if I am looking them in the eye, like you and I would communicate if we were in person. And I don't use video or any of that. So I'm really trying to connect with the essence or the consciousness of the animal to receive their information and whatever they want to share. After we connect, I always do a body scan. I feel like that's really important in the equestrian sport to understand what feels good and what doesn't feel good in the body. And I feel that in my physical body. So I can give an approximate around like your horse has pain and it's in the mid back or it's in the low back or it's in the right hind hock. I'm able to kind of pinpoint because I feel it in my body. And then after that, the person and the horse get to talk back and forth. And my goal is to remain as neutral and as clear as possible. So I'm really just the telephone line between the two, translator, if you will. But my intention is to be clear, to not change things unless the human doesn't know how to ask something or there's a sensitive topic, or sometimes I'll change the wording a little bit on their ask so it's not a leading question. So, some people will ask, do you like your job? And I'll switch it to tell me about your job. Tell me how you feel about your job so that there isn't so that we get the full range instead of a smaller portion. It just makes sure to not miss anything. Yeah. And the wild thing is that some horses are better than others. So just like how you and I have different styles of communication, so do they. There are some great speakers and some not so good speakers. There are some very distracted horses and some very clear horses. So a lot of it comes to personality as well.
Well, it's interesting because I know myself, I did use an animal communicator last year. And from my perspective, one thing that was surprising was I wasn't supposed to ask specific questions. She told me that he would let me know what he wanted to talk about, which was a little bit of a disappointment for me because I did have some specific things that I was trying to figure out about him. So I wondered, is it obviously it is different, as you said, for each animal communicator. Do you find you can have a back and forth dialogue? Because I thought maybe that's just not her gift. Maybe they share with her, but she doesn't necessarily ask specifics about the situation. And I just wondered, in your experience, as I said, has it been a back and forth dialogue where you can ask them questions and get answers? Or are they like people where they might also say, don't want to answer that question today?
Yeah, we can totally have a back and forth. They can totally say they don't want to answer that question, or they may not know the answer to your question. And sometimes they don't want to talk, just generally speaking, just because we have a set time and the person decides that it's time to talk, the animal may not want that time to talk. And it doesn't mean anything about the person. It's not a negative thing. It's just I don't feel like it right now. There are lots of beliefs out there around animal communication, what is possible, what's not possible, the reasoning behind it. So some animal communicators sit there and they just listen and write it out and tell you what it is. In my opinion, this is, not everybody's opinion, but in my opinion, that's coming from a place of we don't listen enough to our animals, and so they need to be heard, and that's the most important thing. And where I totally agree in that, I am also coming from a place of let's collaborate, let's get everybody on the same page, because what your horse may need, you may need something different, and we can come to a common ground and find something that works for everybody rather than asking the human to just change everything and to things that they may not be happy with. So it's a relationship, and I think it should be worked as a relationship. But not everybody has that perspective. Some animal communicators really want to work on spirit, like the spiritual aspect of things. I have a lot of professional clients who go to horse shows and they need results. So we're not working so much on the spiritual plane. We're working on literal, like what's next? What exercise will help you most? What supplement do I need to change here? How do I create happiness? What is your warm-up routine? What does your downtime look like? What, like, give me these specific things so I can help you feel your best, but also need to tell you what I need you to do for me in this. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that absolutely does. And then to your point, when you were talking about it being a collaboration, I would imagine then from what you're saying that you are working in concert with trainers and massage therapists and veterinarians. Do you find in general that most places are receptive to what you do?
No.
Okay.
Um, there are, I mean, I'm really fortunate in that I have a lot of trainers and veterinarians and farriers and massage therapists and chiropractors whom I've talked to one of their clients' horses, and then then their specialty comes out to support the horse. And they mention, well, the animal communicator said just what you're saying. And I can kind of get in that way, but even my own vet, who I've told that I'm an animal communicator, took some convincing until I said, please inject here. And when she did, she was like, oh yeah, that's sticky. And I'm like, yes, it is sticky. That's what I've been telling you. So they sometimes they take convincing. I don't think I'm gonna have somebody who's totally against it call me. Why spend the money if you're totally resistant to it? But I do get skeptical people that will just be very honest in the beginning and say that they're very skeptical about it. It's not my favorite type of call. I would like somebody who trusts the process and is there to really listen and to really collaborate with their horse. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to. I'm really grateful that even if a person is skeptical, they're still willing to call and make the appointment and see what happens. I'm really, really grateful for that. And I have seen a lot of shifts in the equestrian world around listening to our horses and paying attention and getting more information. And this is not a job or a role that I could have guessed would be so important in the equestrian community when I was a kid growing up. And I'm thrilled to see how many trainers contact me, how many people are asking for emergency visits, how many people are showing up to have in-person sessions. It's really beautiful.
Well, it's interesting too, because as I said at the beginning when I was introducing you, I think most people call you when there's a problem. And yet, I would imagine there would be such a great advantage to having you communicate with horses earlier along in our relationships with them. So, do you have clients like that because they're more open, that they have started this process earlier? And would you do it on a regular basis? Would there be sort of a, I don't know, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, once a month sort of regimen that you might suggest for your clients?
Yeah, I speak to many horses once a quarter, once every 3 months or so. So there are a lot of people who are regularly scheduling, especially for the horses that are a little bit nervous or tend to anticipate. Giving them a heads up of the show schedule or what's expected of them is such a game changer. Being able to do a body scan and be like, look, the left hind doesn't feel great. Please watch that. Can prevent injury and stall rest and a lot of difficulty and trouble for both human and horse. Being able to explain what the job is or what the next step is for a horse and training has been really helpful as well. I am working with a trainer kind of in the Sacramento area who has a small client base, but she is so diligent in training her horses that she can get really detailed with her questions, and her horses can provide feedback, but also ask questions to her about what she means for different things. And that's been incredible for them trusting her, but also them moving up quite quickly. So there are people who call me for emergencies, but I book out anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, depending. Uh, and so it's not always an option to have a right away session. And so people usually kind of sprinkle them throughout the year to just see how everybody's doing. There's lots of check-ins and returns and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I was also curious, do you feel that horses understand what we say day to day in terms of just our language? And the reason I ask this is I was quite astonished with my own horse when I first spoke with the animal communicator, that she brought up that he wanted me to know how brave he was. And I laughed out loud because I knew that every day I had been riding another trainer's horse to get my confidence going. And I used to talk about how brave she was without fault every day. I always said how brave she was. And I never said that about him. So I now am so careful about the words I use in front of him. And I now tell him every day how brave he is. So I was curious, is that correct? Are they listening to what we say, and can they actually pick out the words like that and understand what they mean?
So I think that depends on personality. It depends on how much the horse is paying attention. It depends on how interested they are in what you're saying or what that's meaning. And it also depends on the emotional component. So some horses are a little bit more motivated by a higher emotional stakes. Some horses are more motivated by lower emotional stakes. So it is individual. I was speaking to a horse yesterday who asked me if her injury was degenerative. And that is not a word that horses use. They don't know that word. That's not how it comes across. And the vet had, a few days later, speculated that her condition may possibly be degenerative right in front of her. And
Goodness.
so, yeah, it is really important. It's really important because we don't know truly just in day to day how much they are listening or if they're zoned out or whatever, unless you are really connected and paying attention to your horse. The other part of that is we, the way that I explained communication, consciousness to consciousness, sending images and sensations back and forth, is a universal language. We all do it. And that's why animal communication classes are successful. I taught a class 2 weekends ago, and everybody at the end of day 2 was able to connect and communicate with the horses that we set up for them to talk to. So we are already, all of us are already doing this. And the clarity of that message that we're sending to our animals depends on how many other things are we thinking about at that time. And again, the emotional component. So if I'm looking at my horse and I'm telling them, oh my God, I love you so much, but I have anxiety while I'm doing it, it can send a really conflicting message, and they may not understand. Why are they telling me that they love me and they feel this way? Does it match up with any previous events where somebody said goodbye and was really upset while they were telling their horse they love them and sent them away? So the clarity that we have while we communicate to the animal is really important. Seeing pictures in your mind while you're talking consciously, because we all do it subconsciously, but consciously seeing those images will help get the message across. But a lot of it they understand through intention. So if your intention is to tell them that you'll be away for a couple nights and you'll see them when you return, you can see in your mind something specific to those nights. So if the horse can see the sky, sometimes it's a moon. You see like several pictures of the moon, however many nights you'll be gone, or it's like cans of cat food on the counter so they can see when those come down. There are ways to anchor your conversation in, but it is really important to also be careful about how you communicate. And it's not just in front of them because they are connected to you on an emotional level. If you walk away and you're thinking about them and you're feeling distress or you're feeling happiness or whatever, it's the same as me sitting in Portland, Oregon, trying to talk to your horse and sending them messages. So
Wow,
careful. Yeah.
that's much more powerful than I knew. Okay, there's lots to unpack there. One thing I wanted to back up because you were talking about for a horse that might be going away. So, how significant is it for horses who have changed ownership a few times? Because I'm thinking myself, several years ago, I had a horse who'd been through a lot of transitions and he seemed to have a lot of stress and he had not a great life, and I felt really badly for him because it didn't work out with me as much as I tried. But I chalked it up a lot to the fact that he had been kind of passed around and he had been mistreated, I think, by a few owners. So I just wondered in general, what is the impact when horses, are bought and sold? How do they transition, I guess?
Uh, I think it comes down to personality and how those transitions happen, how they are received, or how the owner leaves them. I can't say for the group, but I think that it is important to at least verbally communicate what's happening or why. Horses can interpret the change uh, being something that they did when it's not, in fact, them at all, but maybe not just a right fit. So that type of communication or that type of understanding is a huge deal for the animal. You and I, we can leave. We can go to the grocery store. We can go out to dinner. We can go to the park. We can go to the barn. We can come back. We have that capacity to leave our homes. Horses don't often get the chance to leave when they want to leave. So changing environments is a huge deal for them. If that's moving with the same owner or moving to another owner or a lease. And we expect them to be as excited as we are to have them. And they're going through a grieving process often in the beginning. It says nothing about how you're treating them when they arrive, but they've just left something hugely significant in their life. And for some horses who have transitioned multiple times to multiple homes, it could start to feel like, and I've worked with some that feel like they don't really belong anywhere, or it's hard to catch the rhythm of the new place. And some horses are okay with that. Often it's ponies that, a kid gets for a year or two, and then they're sold over and over again or leased out over and over again. And they get angry about it because it's a challenge. It's a challenge in many different ways. And I think just being aware of your horse's emotional state, especially when you're getting them at the beginning and allowing them to have that emotional space and not putting too much pressure on them right away, saving space to just sit with them or hang out with them outside, showing them that you can show up consistently. You don't necessarily have to train right away or give them treats, but just being present in those situations can help tremendously for them to feel like, oh, I have a friend, I have someone that I can lean on.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so wonderful. I'm thinking you should be talking to everybody. No, that's just such a beautiful perspective of it. And I never thought about it. You're right, particularly with ponies, because they get leased out for seasons or special events. They would have to be very resilient because they're constantly changing. And wow, no, that's really given me some food for thought. So I also wanted to back up and ask you, I know that you've talked a lot about intuition. And I feel like as humans, we all have, as you said, a lot of intuition ourselves. We don't necessarily always act on it or tune into it. How would you describe intuition?
I believe intuition is our sixth sense, the ability to understand or take meaning from the feeling body. There are kind of two levels to intuition. First is a yes no. And then the second is kind of a deeper communication. Intuition is always your first voice. You typically have two voices. So intuition will speak. Don't sit there, call that person, walk away, come back, whatever. And the second voice is typically our protective personality. So it's the, yeah, but I have to get there right now. Yeah, but I forgot my coffee. Yeah, but whatever excuse that the protective personality wants to have. And so whenever I hear that, yeah, but it's a signal for me to turn around and do whatever was communicated initially. Intuition does not come with any emotion, it's neutral. The same message will be repeated. So if you ask your intuition, should I eat this candy bar? It says no. You ask it again, and something in you says yes. That's not your intuition. It won't change. It'll now in that moment it won't change. 2 days later, yeah, it'll probably change. Intuition is typically for the moment that you're in. It'll give guidance for the moment that you're in. You can have an emotional response to the intuitive hit that you have. So being able to decipher, was the emotion first or was the intuition first, is important. Intuition's comments are short. So that feeling of contraction is a no, or the feeling of expansion is a yes, or go there, sit down, stand up. It's really short phrases. Most often they're surprising as well. I had an instance recently where I was taking these electrolyte tablets. They were little pressed electrolyte tablets that were of different flavors, and I thought they were great. They were made by a reputable company that I really appreciate, and I needed a more convenient way to carry electrolytes, so I got the little tablets, and I picked up my cup with the electrolyte mix in it, and I got one word: poison. And I
Uh,
put the cup down and I went, oh, okay, well, let's try again. Picked up the cup to drink it, poison. Well, all right. Now, do I actually think that they're the poisonous? No, no, no. But it was a word that I would respond to in a strong way that my intuition was speaking to me using, so that I wouldn't ignore it, so that I would say, right, okay, not for me to drink these.
so I also, along that same vein, wanted to find out, how did you discover your gift and at what age?
I, so when I was around 5 years old, I went to my godmother's house and was sitting with her neighbor's dog outside, a little white terrier, like Westie terrier. I think that, and I looked at the dog and I said, I want to pet you. And the dog looked at me and said, if you pet me, I will bite you. And I said, okay. And I tried anyway. And the dog
Mm.
bit me right under my eye. And
Ooh.
yeah, it was a big deal, lots of blood. My mom asked me what happened. And I said, well, I asked the dog if I could pet it. The dog told me he would bite me. And I pet it anyway. And he bit me. And my mom said, she said something along the lines of, oh, he must have growled at you. Not to invalidate me, but just to put it in her own perspective so it would make sense to her in her mind. And I said, yeah, the dog growled at me. Uh, I'm sure he did, actually. uh, that really closed off my intuition for many years. And I started working with it when I met a mentor of mine who was able to open it back up for me. We would do different intuitive practices in the morning, working with a pendulum, working with energy, working with colors and essential oils to really open it back up and allow me to listen and connect to animals again. I had purchased, well, I guess I hadn't purchased him at the time, but I was riding my horse Yo-Yo, and we were in a riding lesson and watching this woman and her horse jump an oxer on the diagonal. And they were such a beautiful pair, got the distance perfectly every time. And it was a jump that he and I were struggling with. The distance was not there. I couldn't see it. And I looked at him in my mind. Well, I looked down at him physically, but in my mind, I just went, ugh, why can't you jump it like that?
Mm.
I was really frustrated. And immediately I got back, why can't you? And I was like, yeah, okay, that's fair. And
Wow.
from that, really, he was really such a spectacular horse and taught me so much about listening and connection and being a good partner and all of the things. But he really gave me the confidence to do it on a bigger scale rather than just him and I, or,
And so how old were you then?
in my 20s. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then you said that you had a mentor. So had you instinctively felt that this was something you should be pursuing, that you sought someone out and that they kind of helped you find your intuition again? Like what were you I guess what were you doing in real life at that point?
I was her assistant and her mentee, so I was working for her full time. And she was an intuitive and used color therapy and essential oils to help support her clients. And so she also taught intuition and different things. So I was surrounded by it 24/7 when I was her assistant. I had just moved back to Portland. I was on the East Coast for a little while and was looking for a position that I had some affinity for. I had been working in different like admin jobs and restaurants, and it wasn't fulfilling to me. A family friend introduced us, and I just thought it was delightful and how she was so wonderful, and we connected very deeply. And I likely shared with her my desire to be an animal communicator. I had supported her daughter in finding a riding program here in Portland and gave them advice on trainers or what I thought about the community. And so there was already a horse connection there. Yeah, and she was happy to support me in finding that again.
Wow, I'm just fascinated by this whole journey. And I'm thinking it would seem that the family friend who connected the two of you must have recognized something in you, that they made the introduction and felt like this was going to be a fit.
I don't know. But she did. So I'm really grateful to her for doing that.
And I'm sure your mentor is grateful for you coming as well. So then, how did you develop this into an entire career? Because I'm sorry, I don't know how old you are now, but I'll share with the listeners that I had heard about you 2 years ago when I was in Ocala, and I was having some issues with my horse, and I was talking to a steward, and then they mentioned that, oh, there's this animal communicator that their friend in California uses, and she's great. And this guy who used her was a real skeptic, but he had such success that now he's using her all the time. So clearly you're known out there. And that was interesting for me because that was on the East Coast. And I feel like traditionally the East Coast people are not so open to new, what I would call new age approaches. So maybe just tell me a little bit about, you were with your mentor and training, and then you've developed this into, I mean, I also saw on your website that you do workshops, that it appears that you also do intuition training just for people to tune into their own intuition, not just with their animals. So I'm fascinated by all of this because it's just, there's so many avenues you can go down.
So I worked with my mentor for about 7 years, and she passed away.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
oh, thank you. Right before she passed away, I was working. I had I had some of my own clients while I was working with her, and she passes away in 2018, and I wasn't quite ready to build my own practice. I went back into mortgage. I had a history of working uh, in mortgage and found a job again there. And it was soul sucking. It was just, I had, worked with her for 7 years in this magical environment. And then I went back into loans and
Corporate America.
corporate America, which was just totally different for me. And not that it's wrong or bad for anybody else. It's just clearly that's not my trait, not my highest skill. And I couldn't handle it after a while. So one of my friends who lives in Seattle, she had just moved there, messaged me and asked me to come out to her barn. She had a couple people in the barn that wanted sessions with me. At the time, I was only offering essential oils and horses and helping support that way. And I asked her what she had told them that I did. And she just said, "Oh, the essential oils and horses." And I went, "Okay, okay, that's fine." The week that I was supposed to be going out, people started emailing me who had booked their sessions saying conversations with Coda, chatting with Charlie, like these emails with questions that they wanted to ask their horse about. And I called her and I was like, "Hannah, did you tell them I would be talking to their horses too?" And she said yes. So it was my first real professional, I'm going to go out to people that I haven't met one on one. It was a first barn visit, and I fell in love with the in person sessions and helping people with their horses. I was doing it with my own clients one on one here and there, but I hadn't had a group like that at that time. I came back, and a few months later went to Thermal, and I had emailed a couple women that I actually didn't know very much about. I had messaged them, or yeah, I messaged them and asked them if they would do an Instagram post for me in exchange for a session if they liked it. They both said yes. The sessions went great. They both did posts for me, and my entire trip to thermal filled up.
Wow.
It filled up so quickly that I was getting calls for days after I had returned to see if I would be there still to support people. At that point, my schedule was entirely full 2 weeks after, and I could no longer do of any other jobs. I just didn't have the time, so I was able to quit. And
Fabulous.
I'm sorry.
I said that's fabulous.
Yeah, yeah. I really believe that I was supposed to be doing this. I mean, it started when I was such a young kid around asking for horses, and I stopped riding for a little while in my early 20s and had dreams about horses every week. So much so that I would wake up and like stare at the sky and just say, I I know, I can't do it right now. I know. And it was just always this nudge or this push to be with horses. And the way that it unfolded, that I could do these sessions and how many people were willing, and the timing of it, where people are interested in these things and want to know more about their horses. And there's so many horse welfare educational posts and information coming out right now. It just all lined up. I couldn't have done this in a way that was better than it is now for me.
Mhm.
And
And
yeah,
I was wondering, from your perspective, what is the difference in the communication when you're in person versus when you're doing it remotely?
there's no difference. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no difference. I actually don't go stand in front of the horse's stall. We meet, usually in a viewing room or something along those lines. I don't want extra visual information. I've been around horses since I was 7 years old. I can read body language
Mm,
very quickly. And I don't want that to influence the communication. It's also really helpful for skeptical clients that I can get the horse's personality or what they did in training or what they want to do right away without ever really laying eyes on the horse. So,
yeah, to your point, that could color your judgment. I can imagine. I never thought about it that way. Or that's very cool. And then, would you say there are any common misnomers about what you do?
oh gosh, probably. I mean, I'm pretty sure that people think that I'm just reading body language or I'm asking leading questions or I'm making things up that people want to hear. Yeah. But I mean, if a horse can tell me from spirit that their owner has a painting of them in their living room, I don't think it's not real.
No, no.
It's not real.
And to that point, I was also curious, can you communicate with animals who have passed?
Yes.
Okay. Does that present differently to you as far as what you get? Because I think you were talking about sort of some of the ways they'll communicate time or what have you, that there's certain objects. Is it different when they've passed?
Yes. Yes. Spirit has a perspective that is, 50,000 feet, right? And they communicate using a lot more metaphor or symbology in their conversation. The images that they send me tend to have a much greater depth of meaning. And the conversation is really centered around emotional and spiritual support rather than the physical things that happened in day to day. They still do communicate that way, but they're not in the body. They're no longer in pain. They're no longer having layers of suffering, and the communication differs, and you can get very interesting messages from them about what they are viewing your life as like right now. typically they want you to know that they're happy and they're enjoying it out there and that they're safe and that they're around for you to use them as support if you want to. Invite them into your day, ask them for guidance on things, and they'll give you different ways to see that or experience it. But it's so a horse in body may talk about the blue bucket, and they literally mean they want the blue bucket. That's what they want. A horse in spirit may talk about the blue bucket, and there could be symbolic meaning around holding emotional space or depth of connection or murkiness in the decision that was made. There's such a variety of symbols and meanings that you can kind of glean from the spirit perspective.
Well, I feel like I could talk with you for hours, but I'm going to try to limit just to a couple more questions for you. One is, are there two or three suggestions you could make for any horse owner to maybe improve the communication they have with their horse?
I would say find time to play with your horse on their terms, whatever they need that to be. Find time to play and take your time when you're tacking up, when you're grooming, when you're leading them around, and really in that taking time, observe their response to you. I think I have one more, which is be aware that they are responding to you. Even if it looks like they're looking away, that is a response to you and the environment and something you can glean from that. They're highly emotional, highly intuitive, highly intelligent animals, and they have a lot to say, even if you're not seeing pictures in your head. There's a lot of information that they're giving you and trying to reach out to you all of the time. So,
And my last question is, what is your favorite thing about what you do?
oh, I love bringing a horse and rider closer together. I love that feeling. I had such a special bond with Yo-Yo, and I think that every horse and rider deserves that. Anytime I'm able to support even the tiniest step towards that, I'm happy. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Joanna. I really appreciate your taking time out to speak with me today. And I do want to let our listeners know that they can reach you at thewildthread.com. And I would also like to say to our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about upcoming guests and the podcasts that we've already had, please follow me at Horsetails with Cat on Instagram and Facebook.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.